Got it.
YouTube.
Tweet out the link and hit record. Hey there, and welcome to the Hawkeye Hotspot podcast here on hawkfanatic.com. After a week brief hiatus, we are back. Scott Docterman from The Athletic. I am Rob Howe. It is Thursday, January the 19th. We're almost at 9:20 a.m. Central Time. Scott and I were talking a little. We hadn't talked in a while, so we did a little off air catching up before we decided to hit record. That's always the good stuff, and you guys miss out. So too bad for you.
Yeah.
How are you, Scott? How was vacation? You had a vacation last week.
It went too fast, as they always do. I was home, but part of the problem is the reason why I was kind of had to take vacation was I was capped out my hours and was kind of told you have to start taking this. And I felt like I really wanted to wait until the end of the portal closed, but I took it anyway. I had a little medical thingy. And so then it was like, so I sat there and basically looked at my phone, it felt like, for the whole vacation. But other than that, no, everything was good. And it's always funny, as you mentioned, the pre-podcast, and back in the old days when I used to do this with Mark, we always used to say the real podcast would be the one in the car on the way coming back from a game or going to a game, would be the one that people would actually pay for. But no, it's we'll try to keep it as close as we can to what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, we'll be on our best behavior and try to limit the profanity and all of that good stuff. But plenty of to talk about today. As Scott hit on there, the portal is closed, and by that, people, college athletes, student athletes cannot go into the portal. But the folks that are already in the portal can come out whenever they want, provided the school that they go to, they can enroll in classes, because as we found out with Walter Rouse and others, just because a guy commits and a school reports that he's committed doesn't mean he's bound to that school until he starts classes. So that's where we're at with that. So Iowa started classes this week. I don't know what the cutoff is for being able to enroll at Iowa. Do you know, Scott?
January 30th.
Okay. So there is some time.
There is some time, but, this is where, I like on our Slack channel for the college football channel at The Athletic, when I'm seeing Miami player entering the transfer portal, the Ole Miss player, I'm like, oh my God, at some point you have to be a student, right? And I understand what the sport is, and I'm not going to try to be holier than thou, self-righteous, but even if you're thinking about coming to Iowa, you're missing class time. That's, to me, kind of tough. So yeah, it's January 30th is the absolute drop dead, but you would hope that nobody would consider Iowa, if Iowa was considered anybody, then maybe through this weekend. And, there's like one guy out there that I think, if so happened to be available, I think I would take him. But other than that, it's I think we're pretty much status quo right now, indefinitely.
And the thing with the portal too is, your needs could change here if you have somebody get hurt or, whatever happens in spring ball. So it's an ongoing process. And then that window opens up again May 1st through 15th, I believe.
Yeah.
Where student athletes can go into the portal, and you can continue, obviously, to take people out of the portal. So never ending process. We still have, I think, was it 2 weeks from yesterday, the late signing day? I know it's on a Wednesday. That sounds like it might be right. I think it was 2 weeks from yesterday, 2 or 3 weeks from yesterday, left in the late signing period for high school, JUCO, things like that.
Yeah, it's either February 1st or February 8th, and I can't remember which one it is, and because it doesn't really matter that much anymore. Maybe they'll get one, maybe two, something like that. A lot of times you'll get that Phil Parker surprise, like a Kayvon Merriweather, that all of a sudden, oh yeah, I guess they got a 2-star from Michigan, and next thing you know, he's an All-American. And then they'll get somebody from Florida that'll transfer a year later. That's not to be cynical, but just kind of the way things go. But I did go through their scholarship chart now, because the long snapper Luke Elkin and the kicker Drew Stevens also will be they are put on scholarship. So right now they are at 84/85, counting Spencer Petras, who's still on campus rehabbing. I don't think he's, I imagine he'll be put on some sort of medical so he won't count, because there's just no way with a torn labrum and a torn rotator cuff that he'll be able to even play next fall. So it's really for him. I talked to him a lot in Tennessee, and mainly it was, he's staying around so he can have that rehab, which is really important, having it at a great medical facility, and then just try to figure out if, does he want to, sit out next year and then try to appeal for a 7th year and go somewhere else and play, or maybe the NFL. He definitely wants to be a coach, which I think is his best option. How does he do that? Does he try to be like a grad assistant? Does he take, it'd probably be in his best, it'd behoove him, wouldn't it, to be a master's student and get your master's while you're doing this, and then that way you can go and not have to worry about being a grad assistant somewhere else necessarily. But anyway, yeah, they're right at the limit, and as we always know, there will be probably some attrition in the spring after spring football.
Yep, no question. And there are still guys that went into the portal from Iowa that are still in the portal. Alex Padilla being one of them, Carson May. So the 2 quarterbacks are still in there. I have not heard updates on either one of those guys. Have you, Scott?
A little bit with Alex. He had his sights set on, I want to say maybe Baylor, but there was no interest on the other end. And he had some G5 schools looking at him, and I don't know if he visited or if he just wasn't interested at that time. I'm not really sure. I think it's probably time to make that decision. Carson May, I totally get why he did it. And then Iowa, to its credit, didn't wait around long, and went and filled that spot with Deacon Hill, former, highly sought Wisconsin quarterback, who you talked about, guys going to the portal and then flip-flopping while they commit. That's one. He committed to Fordham on Christmas. So did Dajuan Parker, who picked Virginia and then flipped to Iowa. So all's fair until, when it comes to the portal. And so, I haven't heard anything else beyond that, but I think most of the guys found their landing spots. I would expect probably by the end of this week to be the case, but it's really interesting, Rob. I don't know what you think, but when you start to look at the quarterbacks, it's kind of like every other one has a decent career. The other ones are just in 1 year, maybe 2, and then they're out, for the Nick Shimonik or, the Carson May, and the list goes on and on and on and on, which I think it's not an Iowa thing. It's a universal type of thing, but maybe Carson May can latch on somewhere in the, in the Oklahoma part of the world and maybe find a home there.
Yeah. It's going to be pretty much the norm now, the quarterback situation, I think, and you're going to see a lot of movement and guys left without seats on the bus. And, it's a tough decision too, because, you look around and you're like, okay, this I'm not playing here, so somewhere else has got to be better, but you have to find somewhere else. And there are these windows now of time where you can move, so that can, restricts you a little bit in that regard as well. But I think it's going to be a different experience for fans as well, because you're not going to maybe get as attached to players in certain situations because of the movement of the transfer portal. And it's kind of like free agency in other sports. You know, you have guys that used to play for one franchise for their whole careers, and that was your guy, and that, you know, that was the jersey you had and all those things. It's going to be a little different for college fans now.
No question. I mean, you know, you look back just a few years ago, Rob, and let's say Brandon Smith had that option that he would now. Would he have stayed at Iowa, or would he have gone back down to somewhere in the SEC where I think he could have been a really good receiver? You know, that's speculative, but, you know, you look back at a lot of players that finished their careers at Iowa that may not have in the past. And I think that's something that, you know, even though it's really disruptive and hard to kind of handle, it's also, I think in some ways it's healthy because it forces coaches to have direct communication with their players. Now, beyond that, it is, you know, difficult. I understand that you don't want to have to babysit 100+ players, counting some of the premier walk-ons, but at the same time, you also, you know, coaches that used to take it for granted that they'd be there for 4 or 5 years, and they, you know, if you want to transfer, you have to sit out. You can't transfer within the conference, and now they're going to have to really have those communications, you know, with those players, which is, where do you see me? You know, and coaches would rather look at the, you know, the defensive back or the running back who's really, you know, not quite on the depth chart, but kind of on the depth chart, and used to kind of like, all right, yeah, I like this guy because he can be on special teams and he's there for us in a pinch. Well, for the player now, that's an opportunity. And so you have to have those heart-to-heart realistic conversations. And I think that's what makes that healthy. But it will be difficult for fans to follow and not take it personally when players like, let's say, Arlen Bruce, it was not a fit for what Iowa wants to do. Even in a good Iowa offense, he's not a fit for what Iowa wants to do. So he's going somewhere where he is a better fit. That's fine. That's what it's all about. You know, Reggie Bracey, you know, hey, he was here 3 years. He's not going to start. Xavier Wampa is going to start. Quinn Schulte is going to start. So he's going to somewhere else like we've always seen before. Those are players that you kind of look at and go, okay. But the ones like Keegan Johnson and Justin Jacobs, those are the ones where you're like, oh, God, you know, but that's going to happen year in and year out. So you have to be prepared for it. So you have to like guard your emotions a little bit more than maybe you did in the past.
And we'll have inevitably, Scott, have the comparison, Seth Anderson and Keegan Johnson.
Yeah. Well,
that's what it's going to be. Or, you know, whatever, when you can see like a direct trade-off, because that's basically what that is. You know, a kid from an FCS program wanting to move up in Seth Anderson, and Keegan Johnson, for whatever reason, it didn't work out here.
Yeah.
He was not healthy enough to get on the field last year, and you move on. So we'll see what happens here. You and Mitch Sherman, who writes for Nebraska for The Athletic, did a nice overview of the Big Ten movement in the portal. And it's kind of like signing day, where you're like, okay, this school did really well and this school did, but none of us really know. I mean, I think you have a clearer picture here because these are college athletes and they have a track record in college as opposed to high school kids coming in. But still, as we just talked about, it's about fit. You think a guy's going to fit. Does he fit? Does he fit into what you're trying to do? You know, Wisconsin has been heavy in the portal. They've got a new system now. Do the guys that are there fit in that system? Do the guys coming in fit with the guys that are? So it's what I'm saying in a roundabout way is time will tell here.
Yeah.
But at least we have an idea of what these teams are going to look like going into 2023.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to consider like signing day is more like the NFL draft, this is like the start of NFL free agency. You know, so you do have a track record. I mean, and Wisconsin's a great place to start because they've signed 13 players through the portal, 3 different quarterbacks. So this year,
how many did they lose?
They lost Graham Mertz. That's the only one.
How many players?
Hall.
How many players did they lose overall? Do you have that?
9.
All right, so so they're +4.
They're +4, and they have Deacon Hill came to Iowa. And will fight to be the backup. Graham Mertz is going to Florida. Is he different than Alex Hornibrook or Jack Cohen or any of the other former Badgers who left? I don't know. He came in with more accolades, and he was probably worse than the other two. They lost some other guys. It's kind of weird. There's like a do-si-do with Michigan State and Wisconsin, where they seem to trade players every year, and it's the same thing here. And their profiles are comparable, even if their positions aren't. But you look at Wisconsin, and really what stands out is 3 quarterbacks, all from major universities. I mean, Tanner Mordecai went to SMU. I kind of consider them on the edge of Power 5, and has a huge pedigree and 33 touchdowns last year. And
he started Texas?
No,
I thought he may have began his career at Texas. I may have him confused with somebody else.
It might be, but Nick Evers, who's a highly sought quarterback, went to Oklahoma, only threw 1 pass last year.
Iowa offered him early. I did a story on him. Iowa recruiting him, so they'll be well aware of who he is.
Right. And Braden Locke from Mississippi State. And, the claim to fame, and I found this just fascinating, is Wisconsin has signed one through the recruiting, the regular signing day, and the other through the portal. Is they have 2 young men with the first name Braden, Braedyn, and that's how I spelled my son's name. And we had never seen that before until these 2 guys went there. And I'm like, wow, see, you started a trend, Braden. But, and then they got 4 receivers so they're really remaking and shuffling their roster. Is that going to be something that'll work, or won't it work? They had a certain style of play, kind of like Iowa, and it worked for them. Really over the years, it really came down to quarterback performance, which is, the same as what we did, what we saw here, and a little bit of offensive line. And so you wonder, they're going to kind of go with this power spread type system with Phil Longo as their offensive coordinator, who was at North Carolina with Drake May. And will that work in the upper Midwest? Will he be able to establish that? How will they compete against Iowa? Iowa's not going to just say, wow, you've got this great passing offense. You don't think Iowa's not going to kick the shit out of some of these guys? They're gonna. Minnesota, same thing. So I think, it's kind of a risk, be honest with you. Now, they've got a lot of bling and it's pretty interesting. And I know there's a lot of Iowa fans who are really jealous and looking at, wow, how did they get that guy? How did they get CJ Williams from USC? How did they get Tanner Mordecai and Nick Evers? And man, they're really killing it in the portal, and they look so much better in Iowa. Well, I look at Iowa, and if you want to talk about, they got some real substance. I thought the Hawkeyes overall, the numbers weren't great, but the substance was. They needed a quarterback. And I'm writing this for Sunday. I went through the whole Brian Ferentz offensive coordinator era, which I know what Twitter is going to do with this, but and just to see what went right, what went wrong. And the correlation easily is how quarterback performs. It really matters. And so if you have Cade McNamara, who completed more than 70% of his passes in the first 2.5 seconds of his passing, of his dropbacks, Iowa's going to be just fine. And then you have Eric All, who maybe he's not Sam Laporta, but he's damn close. And if you have Seth Anderson and he plays well, and Parker to me might be the biggest key after McNamara. If he can get on the field and perform, Iowa's going to be, to me, and I may be on an outlier here, I think Iowa's clearly the favorite if that's the case, because you got a quality quarterback, and if you can have improved offensive line play, I think Iowa's clearly the favorite. But beyond that, we also did losers. Purdue and Northwestern are destroyed. Purdue lost, a really good defensive line. It lost 3 starters to 3 major programs: USC, Miami, and Auburn. Northwestern signed 0 out of the portal, and they're always going to be at a disadvantage in this system. So
I thought they grabbed somebody yesterday.
Well,
but I could have missed it. I could have been off on that too. My information is not usually pretty any good.
You might be right, and I haven't had a chance to check every second of every day. But at least as far as when I finished this, they were 0-9. They lost 9, and then 3 of their major impact players are going to the NFL early. And then, on the other side, Indiana is. How often can you just completely overhaul your roster before it's like, you know what, you got a problem here, because they went, I think, 14-20. They lost 20 players, and they brought in 14. And it's like, this is like the 2nd or 3rd year in a row they've been doing this. After a while, it's like, man, you can't play go fish, I think Penn State was a lot like Iowa, really quality additions to supplement a strong roster. Michigan was the same way. Ohio State didn't get a lot, but they got pieces. And they're always going to lose players to good programs that are on the depth chart. But to me, it's for them, it's more about who do they replace that goes to the draft, CJ Stroud and those guys. So anyway, that's kind of a brief synopsis of what Mitch and I kind of went through. We went through, not every team, but close to every team. And then I listed the capsules of the key arrivals and departures. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on some of these areas, but.
No, I think people, if check that article out on The Athletic, it was very thorough, and it kind of gives you that breakdown of who lost what and who gained what. And you can kind of evaluate for yourselves how you feel Iowa did compared to the competition. To me, again, I've been saying this, and people are going to get tired of hearing me saying this. Wait and see approach for me. You're bringing pieces in. Do you put them in the best position to succeed? I don't think Iowa offensively has put its players in the best position to succeed the last 2 seasons. So it's more than just the personnel. It's adjusting what you do to make those players succeed. And we'll see if that happens. I mean, I have, I have high hopes for the guys they brought in. You hope there's progress at receiver. To me, that's still the position. Can Iowa stretch the field? Can Iowa throw the ball down the field? Can Iowa get defenders out of the box so Caleb Johnson can eat, as the kids say? Because, we saw last year, once he kind of got going, teams were like, well, he's not beating us, and took him away. And then Laporta and Lachey got off a little bit, but you're going to have to be able to get the ball down the field a little bit. Hopefully Seth Anderson helps with that. You've got 3 kids coming in as freshmen. Hopefully Jacob Bostic can take a step forward. Deontay Vines can take a step forward. You got Nico back. There's some potential at that position, but again, got to see it. You got to see it at that position. We've talked about, and steps forward on, Parker is a nice addition to the offensive line. How can that unit gel? How can the chemistry and continuity come together there? To me, those are the biggest question marks in the offseason. And then linebacker for me, Scott, with Seth Benson moving on, that was one we didn't know about. I don't worry about defense as much, just because Iowa seems to be able to reload every year. So I think Iowa's going to have a really good defense. It's just a matter of, is it going to be a really good defense? Is it going to be a great defense? Is it going to be an almost great defense? We'll see. But big losses on the defensive side too. They're going to need guys to step in there.
Yeah, for sure. And that is a big question mark. You don't replace Jack Campbell, just like you don't replace Tyler Linderbaum. I mean, they are, when you start with who are the best players in Iowa history at the respective positions, I think those two are very much in competition for the best center of all time is Tyler Linderbaum, the best linebacker of all time. Jack Campbell is heavily in that conversation. So you don't replace them. What you try to do is replace their productivity. And maybe you don't get everything, but you get some things, and maybe you find ways to mask it. And I think they're okay in some respects. They just, what you have to do with Iowa is look at it in two veins, probably in each of these positions. One is, do you have capable starters? Two, do you have enough depth that they could step in and they're not going to be a complete drop off the face of the earth? And we've seen it before where there have been drop offs. I think we saw it in the Nebraska game, that with all the injuries and Cooper DeJean going out, they attacked that spot and they lost to a team they shouldn't have lost to. I saw it in 2020 when they had all those issues at linebacker. Early on in the year, Jack Campbell had mono. Seth Benson couldn't play in the first game. And next thing you know, Justin Jacobs making his first career start as a freshman against Purdue, and Purdue was able to take advantage of it and win late, because they had David Bell. He was pretty good too. but I think when you look at the offense, and this is what everybody's going to really look at, is if healthy, what's the optimum number of skill position players? I think at quarterback, you need one if he's healthy, but two probably. At running back, you probably need two or three. And I think they've got that. I don't think there's really I think Johnson is going to be a superstar. I think LaShawn Williams could be a really good number two if he's willing to play that role. And then I like both Jazz Patterson and Washington coming in. I think they all can do that. And who knows, maybe Kamari Moulton might be the best of the bunch. We're just not talking about him enough. But with Eric All and Luke Lachey, if healthy, they only on occasion will need a third tight end. That's probably Addison Estrenga, possibly Steve Stylianos if he can make that step forward, which he didn't do this year.
Don't count out Johnny Jacuzzi.
Johnny Jacuzzi, yeah, you bet. And Zach Wortworth might, step in and do something.
You never know at tight end, man. We've seen guys come through and you're like, who's that?
Yeah, exactly. Offensive line is critical. If there's an area, I think there's two pretty much for me. If they could have signed two more players on offense, one wide receiver, if they could have got Tesla early or Tesla or whatever. It doesn't matter now because he's not going to be playing here. They're going to got him early, and maybe Rouse, or if they magically get Bray Walker or something like that to visit. If they got two more starters that way, or two key figures, I'd feel really good about this. But you need Parker, and you need a lot of development quickly, because even in that bowl game where you thought, well, they got a full month's worth of practices, but they still look like they didn't play very well. They couldn't run the ball at all. Get good defense and all, but still not very good. So how are they going to piece that plan together? Will Logan Jones take a step? I'm probably in the minority, but I think he will. I think he'll be a really good player this year.
I'm with you. I think they knew there were going to be growing pains there, but I think Logan Jones is going to be a player. How big of a step forward? We'll find out. But I'm that way with most of the offensive linemen, Scott. It's a matter of them. Can they come together as a unit? Because I think Connor Colby will be better. I think Mason Richmond will be better. Those guys are still pretty young. And I think we forget sometimes in college athletics, guys get better.
Yeah, right. No, especially at that position. And people want to see they see a freshman or sophomore really struggle. Well, you got to go back and look at all these players and how they perform. I remember, Brandon Sheriff talking about, his freshman moment, welcome to Iowa moment, was blocking against Mike Daniels and getting destroyed. Well, Brandon Sheriff turned out to be pretty good. And I am not saying any of these players are Brandon Sheriff or I'm not saying Logan Jones is Tyler Linderbaum or anything like that. But I think you'll see progress. Now is the time where they start to, rebuild themselves physically. They need to get stronger. Maybe Mason Richmond's been playing out of position. Maybe not. Maybe this is just, his growing pains, 2 years at left tackle at Iowa, and he's going to be really good this year. Or maybe he's a right tackle, or maybe he's a right guard. I think Connor Colby is going to be good. It's just taking some time. When I look at, the Dajuan Parker and his, I think that's how you pronounce it. I hope I'm not wrong. If not, I apologize. But starter kit is off the charts. You know, he's big, he's athletic, he's got incredibly long arms, he's strong, he's physical, and he's nasty. Now, technique wise, he is really raw, and it's going to take some time. You know, how long? Well, he's got spring football, and he's going to get beat a couple of times by Joe Evans, or, in the spring practice, you're going to see Joe Evans, you're going to see, whether Aaron Graves and all these guys beat him up pretty good. And, he's just going to have to take that commitment to get really good and work on his technique. If he can do that, then that's a really big pickup. There are question marks. I know I've had conversations with people really close to it, that YA Black is considered, that they're thinking he might be a better offensive lineman than defensive lineman. I probably agree with that, but does he agree with it? That's a lot more important. And so I would say, those are all, big, impactful questions. Then finally, receiver. I think that is, the biggest question mark of all. Nico Ragaini, he's a proven player for a long time. If he's healthy, he will be impactful. I think Seth Anderson is going to be part of the rotation. Is he going to be really good, or is he going to be a 20-catch guy? I really liked what I saw out of Deontay Barnes. I think he's going to be a valuable rotational receiver. Who's number 4? Is Brody Brecht going to be able to come back and from being healthy, or when does he decide, I got 8 figures coming my way in baseball, I need to really concentrate on that. Jake Bostic, one of the freshmen, possibly even one of the walk-ons, or do they wait and they get somebody in the portal in May after spring football, which is always possible too. And so my question marks are, can the offensive line coalesce, look good, compete? And 2, can they find 4 receivers? I think 4 is the magic number if they stay healthy. Otherwise, you're looking at 5 or 6, and that's probably a tall order for this team right now.
Yeah, health's going to be a big deal, obviously, with, Cade McNamara's trying to get healthy after surgery. Eric All's trying to get healthy after surgery. Brody Brecht's had trouble staying healthy. So some of the pieces that you project to count on the offensive side of the ball, you need to stay healthy. And we'll see how that shakes out. Wouldn't be opposed to adding a linebacker in May either, if they can find the right guy. And as we talked about, Iowa will have attrition probably after the spring, because guys now are like, okay, where do I stand? And some of that is unclear. It's cloudy, and they get a better picture of that in the spring, not only here, but elsewhere. So then you'll have that next round of movement. And I think Iowa will have some options there, because then Iowa goes through the spring and evaluates what it has. Because the coaches may think right now, okay, this is how it looks. This is, it's January. This is how we view the depth chart and where we are. They could get to spring and say some guy could come out of nowhere and be really good that they didn't count on. And somebody that they count on may not be as good, or may not be far enough along in development. So it's going to be constant movement, as we've talked about, Scott. It's constant player evaluation and roster management.
Absolutely. Take linebacker, as you said. They ran cash on. I went through it all. 71% of their plays. So, and with Sebastian Castro really owning that position and being a very physical defender, he could play kind of a linebacker role. So they could probably say, we could survive without having a third outside linebacker, except when teams are in really heavy personnel, 2 tight end, maybe even 22 personnel. So we're all right there. But Jay Higgins is going to be a quality linebacker. Who is going to be the second linebacker? We don't know that now. They don't really know that now either. But what if Jaden Harrell steps up and, man, he had a kick-ass spring. He's a guy that they feel like, okay, we're happy now. Or Carson Shire, who they really like. Maybe both of them do. Maybe Zach Tweet steps up. Maybe it's Jackson Rexroth or Kyler Fisher, or maybe all of them are good, but I don't know if we can go toe-to-toe with Minnesota and Wisconsin or, Illinois physically with what we have right now. What if we have an injury? We're in really deep doo-doo. So I think that is something that needs to be, I'm sure, Seth's a good coach, Phil's a good coach, Kirk's a good coach, that they will be watching very closely. And I think one other thing to really look at that will go under the radar for a long time is I think getting Jackson Filer as a preferred walk-on was huge because he made freaking plays. He made them all over the place for Iowa Western. And he had scholarship offers and he decided not to, and he's a tweener in size, but you know what Joe Evans was too. He started out as a linebacker and, remember Jaden McDonald and Amani Jones were slated to be that kind of stand-up edge rusher, and he beat them out. It wouldn't surprise me at all if you start seeing something like that out of Jackson Filer, where he's maybe a stand-up edge rusher, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, man, bulk this guy up, and he is special. So I think there's a lot to like there. There's a lot of guys that I'm interested in seeing more, and I could talk about them all day. Devin Hilson is another one. He hasn't had a chance. He's kind of been the fifth running back. He's a really good athlete. He's now on defense. Does he maybe step up and become the number 2 cash? I think that might be his best spot. Or, with his length, maybe even a corner if he's got the quick twitchness. So, I don't know. I'm talking a lot.
Probably no, that's what we do here. We talk.
Yeah, I know. I probably wear people out. But, I have question marks like everybody else. And this is strictly about the roster. The biggest question marks of all is who's going to be calling the plays and directing the traffic on offense. I mean, that's really the big question mark. And so will that happen? Can it happen? We'll see. But I think that's right now, there's a lot that Iowa has to work with. I think fullback is another one that they need to think about. Maybe one of the extra linebackers. Eli Miller got put over there. He played some plays. He's okay, but maybe somebody else gets moved to that role. Maybe they diminish it, if they have a different type of scheme coming in. And either way, this is going to be an impactful offseason for Iowa on the field as much as anything.
I know you run those numbers, Scott. Do you know how often they used the fullback last year, roughly?
You know what? I did that last night, actually. Fullback. I would have to look here.
If you don't have it on you, actually, you know what? We'll take a break here. We'll let you look that up. And so people, that's the teaser for the other side. How often does Iowa use the fullback? We will get to that and maybe talk a little coaching movement, see if we've got anything new on that front on the other side, but wanted to let folks know that support for this podcast comes from Systems Unlimited, celebrating 50 years of providing services to people living with disabilities and mental health needs throughout East Central Iowa. A list of their services and upcoming events can be found at sui.org. That's sui.org. Thank you to Systems Unlimited for their support and to all of our sponsors for the support of this podcast. We're going to hear from a few more of them now. And when we come back on the other side, we will have the answer to the question, how often did Iowa use the fullback in 2022? People on YouTube are probably wondering what the heck I'm doing. I'm going to get more coffee because I need a lot of coffee to get me through the morning. We are back on the Hawkeye Hotspot podcast, and Scott has located fullback usage. Let him have it, Scott.
Yeah, exactly. Well, overall, Rob, it was 34.4% of the plays had fullback. Now, that is a masked figure in some ways, and I can't really break it down much more beyond that because, as we know, Monty Potabon played a lot of second tight end, blocking tight end role where he was in line. I classified that as a two back formation. So a lot of those were actually more like 12 personnel, which is 2 tight ends, 2 receivers, 1 back, but they just put him on the line of scrimmage as a tight end and played him there. So that is actually pretty high for what the actual number would be, which this would be only be an estimate, which would be around a traditional to like a fullback, probably 20%. I would say almost half of his plays came as a tight end or tight end type figure. So I would anticipate, depending on what may or may not happen with the staff, that fullback continues to be diminished except in short yardage situations, unless they have somebody who really is off the charts, because I don't think they get enough out of that position.
Yeah, we talked about the depth at tight end too, so it just makes sense to go heavier with tight ends if you're looking to be physical, power running game. You can do that without a fullback as well. And would like to see some more, spreading out defenses a little bit more too. I think that could be effective in helping the running game get going because, all the things we've talked about, Scott, receiver, offensive line, Iowa's got to be able to run the football, and it hasn't been able to do that effectively the last 2 years. And that to me is, how do you do that? Well, you do that by being a threat down the field with your receivers. You've got to get guys out of the, defenders out of the box. And that's kind of what Iowa's offensive coaches are going to be tasked with this offseason, is figuring how to open things up a little bit more and get the most out of Caleb Johnson and LaShawn Williams and, Terrell Washington Jr., who shameless plug. We did a podcast with him. It's on your feed. Check that out. Jazion Patterson. There's a lot of talent at tight end and running back. How can you best utilize that? So that's the task, and we'll see who gets to make those decisions here moving forward. I know that's where the angst is right now for the fan base, Scott, is you saw it the other day, and we talked about it. You post anything now, a story, doesn't matter what the subject is. Why is Brian Ferentz still the offensive coordinator is what the question is. And that's not going to change until we get some clarity here of what's going on. The last we heard, at least from Kirk Ferentz, is he's, at least publicly, he's in support. He backs his coaches. That's where he's at. We don't know what's going on behind the scenes.
Well, exactly. And I understand the desire for clarity. Lord knows I want it.
Yeah.
Because I'd like to write something different than, hey, let's break down what Iowa did in the portal. None of it matters until Brian Ferentz is gone. I mean, the self-pittiness is just off the charts right now, and I'm just like ready to give it all up. But Kirk's never going to call out his coaches, especially his own son, to media. It's just not going to be the case. So what they're looking for, I think, I've heard it. I'm sure you have too. One person inside told me it was 70-30 that Brian's going to leave for the NFL, and that they've had at least 4 different teams reach out. My guess, if I was to guess on this, is I think when the right situation comes, I think he'll probably accept a role somewhere else. But that's only a guess, and I don't want people, shoving it up my ear. Hey, you said he was gone. No,
you heard that out there, everybody. Scott Docterman said Brian Ferentz is leaving for the NFL.
Yeah, that's only my speculation because it's fluid.
Everybody's vulture eyes on that New England situation right now.
Yeah, but I would look at the other ones too.
Yeah.
I would look at Las Vegas. Josh McDaniels. I don't think they directly work together. If they did, it was a long time ago. But they run a similar system, and then they're the Patriot way all the way through. So I would look at Vegas. I would look. It kind of depends on the ripple effect right now. There are 5 openings in the NFL. Somebody's going to want something somewhere, and who goes where, and how do they fit, and all that kind of thing. That is going to be. There's Arizona, Houston, just it's a lot of these openings right now. I think you just got to you got to be patient. And I know that's hard to do. I mean, but it's not like the transfer portal closed and Iowa's starting today and it's not going to change. Now, in a month from now, okay, and then I think then some of this is worth getting crazy about. But that said, I'm going through for Sunday, and I almost hesitate to write it just simply because I know what the reaction is going to be. Well, none of this matters until Brian's gone.
Post it and run.
Yeah, it's like, here's your story, read it. I might even put I even did it on Twitter the other day. I put warning, ! This story does not contain anything about Brian Ferentz. And of course, half the comments were, well, you just don't know what it's like. Well, there's a lot of times when I'd really like to say what I think and I can't, but what I've tried to do is analyze, okay, what did Iowa do well over these last 6 years and how can they do well again in those certain areas? And, tight end usage is critical anytime. But when they had Hawkinson and Fant, they were deadly in the red zone. They were as good as anybody in college football when they were in that spot. And I do have numbers, but I have so many folders that it would be bad radio, Rob, if I were to look it all up and ruin it, to some extent. But let me see. It's so good that I have to share it. It's just maybe if you what do you think, and then I'll jump back in.
This isn't anything new, Scott, and we've talked about this before. And I'm not saying it's the elephant in the room, but how much or how willing and how accepting is Kirk Ferentz to change on the offensive side of the football, whether it's Brian or John Budmeyer or somebody from the outside? What is he willing to adjust, so to speak? Because ultimately, from Ken O'Keefe to Greg Davis to Brian Ferentz, the three most criticized assistant coaches in the last 24 years of Iowa football. And there are three different guys, but the one constant is Kirk Ferentz. And it's his philosophy, it's his foundation. How much is he willing to not completely change everything, but welcome innovation, modernization? We see it. I mean, you look at what Minnesota does. You look at, teams that are still power football teams, but have come up with ways to get defenses, make the defender's eyes get them out of place. And Iowa just doesn't do that enough. And I think it is some of that foundational philosophical, those areas that could use some sprucing up. I'll use that word, Scott.
Sprucing up. I like it. Well, in 2018, Rob, they were 8th in red zone passing yards and 8th, and they were 8th in touchdowns and
Big Ten.
Pass. No, nationally.
Nationally, okay.
TJ Hawkinson on third down had 379 yards receiving, on third down alone, which was not only the most yards by any tight end in the country, it was 6th overall in the nation. Tight end, Iowa, yards, passing. He had the most catches on third down of 25 plus yards of any player in college football. And 15 of his 17 catches on third down went for first downs. Now, how do you mold that? And then you look at Noah Fant, no player potentially in the last 10 years in college football has been better in the red zone. He was unreal. Let me pull that up here.
Specialist.
Specialist, and that's okay. He was targeted 21 times, and this was from 2017-18, 21 times in the red zone. He caught 15 of those passes with 12 touchdowns.
Wow.
And of the 61 passes with players with at least 20 red zone targets in 17-18, his 57.1% touchdown rate was the best in college football. Those are numbers that I don't give a shit if it's Brian Ferentz or me calling. You'll take them every single time. Well, how do they go from that to this? And, because this year they were 115th in yards, 118th in touchdowns in the red zone. Well, a lot of that has to do with, yards per attempt. A lot of it's quarterback. A lot of it's play design, though, too. As we've talked about, they only attempted, 6 passes the last 2 years inside the goal line and into the end zone. Now, they didn't do a lot of that either with Fant and Hawkinson, but they were able to move their position, their bodies well enough. They didn't give Laporta and Lachey enough opportunities. Now, the one difference maker who was there that everybody had to be cognizant of that they aren't now, that they don't have, is Brandon Smith, because he could win one-on-one matchups and fade balls in the end zone like any other player Iowa's never had. So you have to be able to find an ex-receiver who would allow those tight ends to work in the red zone, and so. None of this is Brian Ferentz bashing. These are the numbers. And that's what I think there's such a bloodlust right now and a pound of flesh that everybody wants to exert from Brian Ferentz. And I want him gone now. That you have to look at it. You have to cut it all the way down to the source, but then you also have to look at a big picture, kind of back and forth, which is they were really, really, really good at this before. But they're not now. They had outstanding tight ends who were first-round draft picks, who are one's a Pro Bowler and one's on the periphery. They had this year with Laporta, NFL player, Lachey, probably an NFL player. Next year, and Lachey, probably NFL players. How do you run that type of offense, involve them the way you did once? But what's the damn difference in now versus then? And that's where they've got to really figure it out. Likewise, some of the other things that I think was really fascinating is I looked at 2020 rushing yards. And on first down in 2020, they averaged almost 6 yards a carry. This year, it was a little over 3. In the red zone that year, they averaged 3.5 yards a carry. That's pretty good in the red zone because a lot of those carries are at the 1 yard line or 2 yard line. This year, it's less than 2 yards a carry. Why is that? Well, you had a kick-ass left tackle that nobody really talks about now, Alaric Jackson. He was outstanding in blowing people up and on the outside zone. The other thing is they averaged almost 7 yards a carry this year when they used jet sweep motion. You know what? When your offensive line can't get to their reach blocks on the outside zone, using the jet motion, just motion alone causes confusion at the second and third levels, which enables you to just get a little bit of extra push on that. You know what? Use it every freaking play.
Yeah.
So if you're going to get 7 yards a carry this way and 3 the traditional way, you've got to back out of that. So those are the things I'm looking at. I'm really wanting to decipher, and I just wish the majority of people would say, instead of jump to we'll just get rid of Brian Ferentz, and just say, okay, I understand that. That makes sense. That's something that they can do, and they don't have to deviate from their principles and their foundation. So I think there's just really a lot of things to look at here, and hopefully hopefully people give it a chance, and not just fire Brian, fry Brian, not even fire, fry.
Good luck with that.
I know. I'm talking to myself. I'm talking to the wall right now.
I think everybody's waiting to either celebrate his departure or lose their minds that he's coming back.
Mm-hmm.
I think I feel like that is what the buildup is right now. Is what is the future of Brian Ferentz as it relates to the Iowa football program and the reaction that's related to that. And hopefully we have some clarity here within the next month or so. And I think we will. one way or the other, and then everybody's got to deal with it.
Yeah, because if he's coming back, bashing me for not asking the tough questions or anybody else, it really doesn't matter because we don't make those decisions.
Right.
I can't, and I can't stand up and point and go, no, God damn it, Kirk, why did you do this? I know that's the way the fans want it. And maybe they should allow the fans to come to those press conferences.
No, please, no.
Just don't say anything, but you can watch, but no. But, the thing is, I think more than anything, Brian has become a symbol, and a symbol that there has not been, that the offense is bad and it's not changed. And Kirk is really the one, as you said, and is true, is the one kind of dictating everything. Now, what you need is probably somebody who's able to withstand that, but you also need enough good players to ensure that somebody can justify saying, "Hey, it's 3rd and 2, but we want to go with a play action pass here, and here's why," or it's 4th and 1. And I know this is going to stress you out, but we think instead of sneaking, we can hit the home run on this ball. And we know that if it doesn't work out, you're going to have to answer those questions at the press conference. We're sorry, but we think this is the reason why. and that's, is John Mudmeyer tough enough to be able to do that? What about Paul Christ? Somebody like that, is that the case? Well, we'll see. But I think overall, but Brian has become as much a symbol as he has been, a struggling offensive coordinator. And there's been a lot of play design, and I think there's been a lot of play calling that has been subpar. And I really do believe that. But I also think that everything crashed at the same time for this offense. The offensive line was too young. It was inexperienced. It did not perform well. The receiving injuries were off the charts. We haven't seen anything like that before. I mean, only at running back in 2004 has anything approached what happened at receiver. Quarterback was inconsistent. Love Spencer. He's a great guy. He will be a fantastic coach. And he may be an offensive coordinator in 10, 15 years that everybody wants. But as a quarterback, he was just too inconsistent. If you can find ways to improve all those areas, this team's not only in Indianapolis, it's competing in Indianapolis. And I don't think they're that far away, but I think they are far away. And I know that may sound contradictory, but I think you get the right pieces, you get a good quarterback, which I think they have, you get improved offensive line play, you get receivers that make plays, and you marry it with a little bit more upgraded scheme that works to its advantages. I think this team is in Indianapolis, and I think it can go toe-to-toe with any of the teams that'll be there.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how these Big Ten teams are evaluated going into the offseason. I've seen some indication that Michigan is going to overtake Ohio State as the favorite going into next year based on the additions it's made, and really good additions. It has just has a way. Well, they're not only additions but retention. There are guys coming back for them that are that start with Blake Corum, but guys that you thought would be off to the NFL are coming back. So.
Cornelius Johnson, Donovan Edwards. Their big holes were up front. That's what they really targeted in the portal. They did a really nice job of securing those. Michigan is the favorite now. They're the 2-time defending champ, and then when you look over at Ohio State, they have the most talented player in college football in Marvin Harrison. But the silver football seems to reside in the locker of every Ohio State quarterback, but at some point they're going to strike out. At some point it's not going to be, like it was with CJ Stroud or before him Justin Fields or Dwayne Haskins or JT Barrett and on and on and on and on. At some point they're going to go, this isn't very good comparatively. So maybe that's the year. And I look at Penn State and I'm like, they're not that far. They did the right thing. They went after a couple of playmakers. They got a punter in the portal who's, which we know how important punter is. Iowa getting Torrey Taylor to me is like getting a 6th-year guy.
Yep.
It's an NFL punter, but they got a guy who averaged 46 yards a punt. They know what field position is going to bring against Michigan. Now, so I almost look at those two as I hate to say it because it's been Ohio State's league for so long, but I almost think Michigan and Penn State might be a little bit better than Ohio State at this point in the game. Although Marvin Harrison is the best player in the college.
Yeah, we'll see if Drew Aller is ready for prime time and live up to the advanced billing at Penn State. Everybody's wanted him to be the guy. Now he will be the guy. And they added some nice pieces and a lot of pieces coming back. The West will be wild again, and we'll talk a lot more about all of that stuff moving forward. It seems like we have news every week in regards to football these days, and I don't anticipate that slowing down. The Iowa sports community kind of came together last night, Scott, I would say, social media wise, and just sharing memories of Chris Street as his documentary aired last night on Big Ten Network. Wonderful job by the network in what they did with a story that if you follow Iowa athletics, you've heard it. The details. They did a good job of just telling the story for those that knew it and for those who didn't. So, and that's sometimes hard to do when you're, when your target audience knows the story. Being able to put something together like that that is really moving is not always easy to do, and they did a great job. And we talked about it before we started recording. The most interesting thing for me, and that's because, again, I've interviewed Patty and Mike through the years and have talked to Jess Settles and Kenyon Murray, and we right. Those of us that have followed the story know it really well. But the one piece that hasn't really been disclosed since there was a trial was Charles Pence and his involvement. And I thought they did a great job with that. I was pleased that he felt comfortable enough to speak about it. And for those that don't know, he was the snowplow driver. And I found him very sincere, Scott. And, I know you've talked to people that know him, and he's had a hard time. And you can imagine why, because we saw last night how important Chris Street was and remains to the state of Iowa and the Iowa Hawkeye community in particular. And this guy was a villain and, went through a lot of crap. And I thought he handled himself very well. And I found him to be a sympathetic figure. I felt bad for him.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, it's really tough when you have a tragedy like this, and we've all experienced it in our own lives personally. And you always look for somebody to blame, something to blame. Something had to have, taken something so good. Something had to be evil or bad to take something like that away from us. And when you have a figure like Chris Street, who was not just your typical basketball player. He was a son of Iowa. He played with the inspiration and the toughness and the will, and he loved to play for Iowa. That really endures, and it did even then. Everybody responded. I was a freshman in college at that point. I lived in Indianola for a couple of years. My brother still lived there at that time. So I in fact, I think it was my freshman or sophomore year, they knocked us out of the district or the regional finals. Chris Street and Bruce Overton, from Indianola, they beat Burlington to go to state, and so there was there's a lot of familiarity there, and so I understand the connection. And so when he was killed so tragically, that people naturally wanted to know why and how, and this couldn't have just happened the way it did. There had to be something nefarious or involved. and it was a terrible, horrible, tragic accident. Even now, I think about when you turn right or left out of your own driveway sometimes, or you get to a T intersection with no stop signs, and you just kind of look and you're, oh man, I almost did it there. And it's easy to see how things like that happen. But, what I also found out of this was, because I was, you kind of wonder, going to trial, suing the snowplow driver, how much did that take away from the message of what Chris Street was about? And in some ways, you've got the human aspect of, they wanted to know answers. And then there was the snowplow laws that were changed, or the lights that were changed on snowplows afterwards. And I'm like, okay, there is some meaning to this. This isn't just a hollow gesture because they were, their son would have went to the NBA and made probably, he would have been had he stayed healthy, he would have been in the NBA 10 plus years, I think. I think he's that type of player that earning potential was more, but it instead of it being a cash grab, hey, we want to, I think there was some meaning behind it. And then, Charles Pence, a sympathetic figure. I think those of us that could kind of remove themselves from the emotion of the situation feel like, wow, it was just an accident. And for the vitriol that he had to endure was tragic in its own right. And I was glad that he was able to talk about it. You could see that the moment pained him, because no matter, if you're a semi driver and somebody does that, you hit them, or train conductor, it affects you. I mean, I've talked to, train people who they see a car stalled on the tracks, or somebody's jogging on the railroad tracks and they can't get out of the way. And it affects you. I mean, you're killing somebody. And so I hope there's some closure there. I don't know if there will be, but I hope so. And I think people could kind of look at it as the story in totality. And I thought BTN did as good of a job with a documentary as I've ever seen with any documentary I've ever watched.
Yeah, no question. It would it'd be nice if maybe Mike and Patty could get some closure in talking to Charles Pence, if that ever comes about. It's not necessary, obviously. And, it's very raw and it would be hard, but hopefully they took something out of him being on camera last night and kind of getting a feel for him. I don't know. We're both parents, Scott. I don't know how I would feel if I lost a child. I think I know I'd be torn apart, and I couldn't even imagine. And we saw that last night. I thought they did a really good job of capturing the loss for Mike and Patty. But the point that you made, I heard about the lights on the snowplow before, and kind of how that was a plausible reason. And it even made more sense when I watched it on the documentary last night, when you saw this previous, where the lights were previously on snowplows. And if they're back and the snowplow is however many feet in front, you can see how, if Chris was coming out, he would have thought he had more time based on where those lights were. And it seems like it was so obvious, that was dangerous, but it took a tragedy to show how dangerous it was. And like they said, that's probably saved more lives by getting that changed.
Yeah, exactly. And we all make those judgment calls every day, whether we're turning left from the Wigan Pen on the Coralville Strip, and you see cars coming and you're just trying to dart through. I mean, but on a snowy night, without a lot of lighting and snow plows, and it's tough. And the judgment call wasn't, was tragic. But I do think that if it did save a life, then it wasn't in vain. And I guess that's one thing that, Patty and Mike can kind of take away from that. It was at that point, the ultimate, and it's remained so, the ultimate, where were you in the state of Iowa when this happened? and I get chills thinking about it because, I was a freshman in college. I went to school in Burlington at SEC, and we were, I guess I'll tell my story here, as I was shooting pool at the Townhouse Bar. And I was the one that had lost the game before, which I'm still pissed about. But with
Was
two
there
other
money
friends.
on the line?
Yeah. And one of my friends now is they're both executives, one in Minneapolis, one in Nashville at the time. But I was sitting at the bar, and back then, they didn't have big screen TVs, and I just kind of casually looked up, and Sports Center was starting, and they didn't run like the scroll like they do now, or the crawl, and they didn't run any notes, but I just saw the sound wasn't on, and I just saw, Chris Street on there leading off Sports Center, and one of my buddies just was like, "What's going on?" And I'm like, "I don't know." And I knew they didn't play that night, and I remember saying it couldn't have been good. Something bad must have happened here. And then when I went home later on, that my friend found out what happened and called me, and I was like, so it was really the state of Iowa kind of stood at a standstill for multiple days, because, not only was it basketball, and basketball is probably bigger then than it is now, but just that, of who he was, what he represented, how connected he was with everybody in the community, the greater Des Moines area, the Fred Hoiberg fact. I thought, if there was one thing I wish could have gotten a little bit more play, was how Iowa State had a number 40 for a player. I mean, Fred did it, and they mentioned that at the end, but how, for a long time, several years, they had a number 40 for an in-state player based for Chris Street. I mean, who does that? I mean, what an incredible gesture that is. And then you look at, the players on the team, which we all knew. I mean, Chris Murray is named after, Chris Street. Jess Settles was really close to him, because they both had similar profiles in Iowa at that point. I mean, both were the sons of Iowa, in different parts, central Iowa and southeast Iowa, but, Jess was thought of in the same light, and how close he was. And, gosh, we can go on. And it truly was the where were you then? And you came to Iowa about 3 or 4 years later, right, Rob?
97.
Yeah. So about
it was almost, it was interesting because when the part of the documentary last night where they had Bobby Hansen talking about the Chris Street Foundation, I think that launched like October 12th in 97. Mm-hmm. And that was the week that I moved to Iowa.
Okay.
I remember hearing that, and I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that, because obviously it was a national story, and I remember hearing about it. I didn't have the connection that you folks did who grew up in Iowa, but it certainly was a wow, because I remember Chris Street as a player and how fun he was to watch, because I was a huge college basketball fan. But it seems like, and I think, and we could kind of segue into talking about this year's team. I think it gives that Chris Street is kind of the symbol of what Iowa basketball is about and what they represent. I think that's another positive that came out of this. And I saw Connor McCaffrey tweet about that last night about it even gives the guys that thought they knew a little bit more clarity on what it means and what he meant. And they see his plaque every day when they go in and out of the locker room. But I think last night was even a little bit more of what this is what it's about. And that's a positive. That's a positive that you kind of look to Chris Street and want to represent the black and gold the way he did and love it the way he did. And I think that will carry on.
Well, you saw, I was glad they captured a lot of the moments of, whether he would score and he throw down his arms. He's just very excited, aggressive player. Everybody, I think if there's an eternal symbol that everybody remembers is him guarding the inbound pass. Here he was 6'10", 6'9", whatever, arms up, always looking around, and just he was tough as nails. And I think that's, if there's, a requisite that I think all Iowans want from their athletes is they want toughness. They want heart. They want, character. They want all those, intangibles to go along with the physical gifts. And, Iowa has never won the national title in football or basketball. Not that you'd give up on that dream or that hope, but it's probably not going to happen. So, but what you want is somebody who feels it the way you do. And there have been a lot of football players who fit in that ballpark too, but Chris was just different. And I think, what happened in the immediate aftermath, I mean, there were 3 historical games that happened in succession after that. I mean, we know about the Michigan State comeback, which was just a shock. How in the hell do you come back to Breslin? I can't remember if it was the Breslin Center or the old field house there.
Yeah, I can't remember. It was right around that time where Breslin came in.
Well, at Michigan State with Judd Heathcote as the head coach, and they had some really good players. How do you come back from that kind of deficit with 3 minutes to go? The Michigan game, which you'll never see another one like it again. That is, the most emotional game, and it even makes me a little emotional now. 30 years later, I remember watching it, and then right after that, they lost at Illinois. Andy Kaufman's shot, which was, and that was at the height of the Iowa-Illinois hate fest rivalry. And it's still boiling between the two programs. But at that point, this was just in the shadow of Bruce Pearl. Lou Henson, I think his son had died in a car wreck not that long before that. He would never shake Tom Davis's hand, but then after Chris Street. But it was still just a passionate rivalry. And, to lose on a last-second shot like that was heartbreaking. And honestly, I think, we saw what Davis walked into, and that was really a massive situation. But I think overall, that was probably his best team of his own best players because, Val Barnes, A.C. Earl, Chris Street. I mean, they had a really good shot, if not to go to the Sweet 16, to certainly go to maybe even the Final Four that year. They were that good, that talented. And, it didn't work out, but man, it is a legacy, and I'm going on and on, so.
Yeah, I think it touched a lot of people last night and emotions, and it's always going to whenever the story's told. I will also promote Rick Brown, our colleague's book, Emotion in Motion. Check that out if you can. I have a signed copy somewhere. Scott's got one. I'm sure he's reaching for right now.
Yeah, I got it
at some point. So check that out.
I'm straight over there.
The segue into this year's team. Everybody who's listening knows that the game last night was postponed, canceled, trying to be made up against Northwestern. Northwestern is dealing with COVID issues right now. Yep, it's still a thing, and we're not going down that road.
Yeah.
But it does affect teams, and it sounds like their game against Wisconsin this weekend is in jeopardy, if not been called off already. So then they'll have multiple games to have to make up, and I haven't dug into, I think somebody said February 7th may be an opening or something. There are some different openings, I think, that are possibilities for Iowa. But we'll see how that comes together. But Iowa has won 4 in a row, left for dead after starting 0 for 3 in the Big Ten, now 4 in a row. Last one being Sunday against Maryland at home. Big stretch here, Scott. This Saturday, 1 o'clock in Columbus against Ohio State, which has lost 5 games in a row after losing last night at Nebraska. And then next Thursday, a week from today, the aforementioned East Lansing Breslin Center. 2 tough places to play for Iowa coming up here. But even if you get a split here, I think you're doing pretty well. If you can get 2, great. You just don't want to go 0-2 here. And then coming back a week from this Sunday is the next home game, and that's Rutgers at home. So important stretch here. Everything's important. When you look at the Big Ten standings, Scott, it is Purdue and then just a jumble of teams.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the Big Ten and who they're going to play and everything like that. It's really a challenge. I think right now what you can do is I think you're going to be prepared for a last stand from Ohio State. They're 2-5 in the league. As you said, they had a long losing streak. They're 10-8. They are going to come out at home with some urgency. And Chris Holtman's a really good coach. So I think what's going to happen is they're going to try to play their best. What you do is you take it to them immediately and take them out of the game. Make them feel like, okay, this is just not our day. This isn't our season. Take the will to fight. That's not going to be easy because they are going to be playing hard for 40 minutes probably. So you're going to have to play some of your best basketball in the year. And that's probably, and that's going to be a challenge. I know they're 2-5. I know they lost 5 straight, but I would say other than Minnesota, and even Minnesota has shown, beat Ohio State. So
they won at Ohio State.
Yeah. So things, and then look at Iowa. Conversely, they've lost to Nebraska. They have their own losses, some warts. So I think overall you got to take that out of them. And then of course, going to Breslin, traditionally that's been a house of horrors for Iowa. But in the last few years, it hasn't been. Iowa's, what was it? When Luka was there, I think it was during the COVID year, they won by like 30 there, and then they won again recently. So I don't know, but you're going to get a well-coached team there, and they're going to do what they do. And the season doesn't end after those 2 games either. Because as you said, Rutgers at home, okay, Iowa played its best game this year at Rutgers. Now they're playing them at home. Rutgers is going to come out and play really well because they're well coached. Like, and I don't want to sound like a coach myself, but they're second in the Big Ten. They're only a game out of first place. One of their losses was to Iowa, but they won some big games. Then you play Illinois at home. The only meeting, it's already sold out.
Yep.
And we know what kind of atmosphere, what kind of effort, kind of intensity you're going to get there. And then finally, then you go to Purdue. What a way to shut that thing down. So they really need one of these layup games in the middle, don't they? Maybe that's what the Big Ten needs to do with basketball: spread it out to where maybe there's 4 Big Ten games in December, and then now we're going to mix in SEMO. Or something like that. The first week of February, everybody gets their SEMO game, kind of like the SEC. The week before the rivalry weekend. In football, everybody gets to play. Stetson or Mercer. Mercer seems to always be the mercy killing. For these teams.
Just not Eastern Illinois.
No. Well, I'm sure they would love to play them now, but what a terrible game that was.
What we saw against Maryland, Scott, I think that I don't like this term. I don't like the X factor, but I think for Iowa to reach its potential, I think you kind of know what you have in Chris Murray, and that's a candidate for Player of the Year in the league.
Yeah.
Philip Rebracha has proven he's consistently a factor now, where he was up and down last year. He's taken the step forward. You know what you get from Connor: better shot, toughness, glue guy. When Patrick comes back, you kind of know what you get there. For me, it's Tony Perkins. I think he has that. He has the ability that he showed against Maryland, but he has a tendency to drift and fade away at times. And they can't have that. He has to be maybe not that good every night, but a factor in the game every night for this team to reach its potential.
Yeah, no question, because you need that third guy. And really right now we're kind of removing Patrick McCaffrey from the mix because we just don't know. And, and God bless him. Hopefully he gets, he's able to get better. But I think with Tony Perkins, I think it showed he's probably better off the ball, and that doesn't mean he can't bring the ball up and distribute some of the offense, but I think he's better at just going and get buckets, being a dog on defense, being a dog on offense, being a tough guy, and I think that's not necessarily who he is as far as the point guard goes. And what Iowa needs is Aaron Eulis or, Josh Dix was really good the other day. He had 5 assists and no turnovers. That's big. Maybe even DeSante Bowen, but he's been really inconsistent. And I think right now what Iowa needs is somebody who can focus more on moving the offense and allowing Tony Perkins to do what he does well. Because when you do add that with Bracha, and with Chris Murray, who again is one of the 3 best players in the Big Ten and probably one of the 15 best players in the country, I think you have that element. Then this team's going to be a hard out the rest of the way. It might be a top 4 team by the end of the season. But if you're only going with those 2 on the road, foul trouble in the post, then things can go sideways, as Fran would say, very quickly.
Peyton Sanford also playing well. And you're going to have guys that, shooters are going to have off nights. But Perkins is a guy who can get his in different ways. Not the best outside shooter, but can hit threes. It's that mid-range game he showed against Maryland, that ability to penetrate, foul line extended, get in the lane a little bit, shoot over top of people. I think he has that ability, and I think his ability to do that opens things up for other people as well. So hopefully the light went on for him, and he gained some confidence there, because he has a tendency to not be as aggressive as he needs to be on the offensive end. He's always a good defender. He and Lewis are really good defenders, and hopefully they show that going forward, because this is after Purdue, this is a pretty wide open league, and Purdue's going to hit some speed bumps during this thing too. Everybody does in a 20-game conference schedule, no doubt. Did not watch the Iowa women last night, Scott, because in the Big Ten's infinite wisdom, they decided to put that on Big Ten Plus. I get why they do it with the non-revenue sports to get people in, but I almost think it's a disservice to the athletes too by doing that, because they don't get as much exposure. Be that as it may, I'll get off the soapbox and say that's an important win for Iowa. Fell behind, trailed a lot of that game. I was following it, but comes back to win in overtime. And we've talked about it on here. Iowa's getting everybody's best shot. It got Michigan State's best shot last night and was able to respond. And that's what you're going to have to do the rest of the league or the rest of the year, because you're going to get everybody's best shot. Yeah,
this was a team that was 2-5 playing at home, but figured, hey, we're playing the marquee team in the even though Ohio State is ranked number 2 in the country, but you're playing the marquee team in the Big Ten. Caitlin Clark stands out. She's Michael Jordan. And so you're going to get everybody's best shot. And you're playing on the road, and you're playing, after one of the most dominant performances I've ever seen, against Penn State. That was truly remarkable, the way they beat the hell out of Penn State. I was there as a spectator. My wife has season tickets, and so every now and then I'll go with her. I try not to go all the time, because I feel like it's work. I'm there for work. So
I get that feeling too when I take my kids to sporting events that are Iowa related. I'm like, oh, this is where I work.
Yeah, I know. It's like, no, let's keep this out of the realm. I don't cheer because I don't cheer, and it's not that I don't appreciate it by any means. I do appreciate it, but it's just a different thing to turn on and off. And so, my wife takes a lot of her friends, and I think that's a good way to expose the program to different people who, maybe normally didn't. But all that being said, they played so well against Penn State, and then struggled and fought and had to fight back. And they were down, by 4 at one point in overtime, I think it was. And so, and then I don't really know what happened, and I want to see more about it. But the intentional foul that Caitlin Clark got called for, Michigan State misses a 3-pointer. Iowa gets the ball out of bounds, 5 seconds left. And then Caitlin Clark gets called for an intentional foul, which gives them Michigan State 2 free throws and the ball. How in God's green earth does that get called? I didn't see the play. So I'm asking more than anything else, how does that get called? That never gets called in a million years. So they survived, which is what you need to do, survive and advance on the road. And then Monday night is a big, 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 big game. Ohio State's on ESPN2 at 6:00. So this is, I imagine you'll get quite an audience for this one.
Yeah, this next stretch here, Scott, you've got Ohio State in Columbus on Monday, 6:00 ESPN2, as you said. Then next Saturday is Alumni Day against Nebraska in Iowa City. That's on Fox. Yeah. And then the following Thursday, February 2nd, it's Maryland in Iowa City, and that one's on ESPN. So this is a stretch on the big stage here for, as you said, one of the marquee programs in the country with a marquee player.
Yeah. And she is the marquee player in college, maybe college basketball, maybe not just women's basketball, but I mean, people want to see her play.
It's must-see TV. Seriously, when she's on, you never know where she's going to hit one from half court.
Everybody's been waiting for this 40-point outburst with 10 3-pointers. And hitting from the logo and walking around, doing something like that. She might be the biggest thing to happen to women's basketball ever, and I don't say that hyperbole, because she has so many. I mean, you talk about Megan was this way too, Gustafson, where you go to the arena and there would be dozens of young girls with headbands on, wanting to get a glimpse and an autograph. But it's even more so with Caitlin Clark, that she has turned the nation around to watching her. And when you got NBA people checking her out, she could probably, it wouldn't surprise me at all if now that she's a Nike athlete, if Nike comes out with the Caitlins, women's branded basketball shoes. And they probably should. I mean, I think that's the way you build your audience. And then, and with the way the WNBA is and stuff, if she was a male athlete, she'd already be in the NBA. But she can build and promote her brand probably better through women's college basketball than probably at the pros at this point. But when she gets to that level, there's going to be a fight over who gets drafted number one. Because if you're the New York Liberty, hey, she's got an Italian heritage. She shoots the three. She's the most exciting player in women's basketball. You want that because she's going to build audience. She's going to build audience on television and in the arena. Or if you're the LA Sparks, the one thing is, God bless them, but you don't want her playing for the Minnesota Lynx. It's just you or the Seattle Storm or something like that. You want her in a major market, maybe the Chicago Sky, but probably more like the New York Liberty or the LA Sparks. So I think she can continue to build that brand. And the way she does it is have big games with big audiences. And now is when this really starts to connect. College football's over. The eyes of the nation are looking for more entertainment options. The NFL playoffs will be, as of Monday night, it'll be down to 4 teams. So people are going to look at basketball, and Caitlin Clark's going to be that driving force.
New York Liberty with Sabrina Ionescu, that would break the WNBA. That would be a great great boost to the league if you had those two teaming up in New York.
Yeah.
Wrestling, Scott, big one tomorrow night, Friday, January the 20th, Nebraska, Military Appreciation Day. Nebraska comes to Carver Hawkeye Arena. It's been an interesting season for the wrestling team. They've gotten pushed a couple times this year. Obviously, Iowa State pushed them at home. Was it last week, the Illinois? Yeah, that was
2 weeks ago, I think.
2 weeks ago, Illinois at home, give them a push. So home meets this Friday against Nebraska, and then a week from this Sunday against Wisconsin at home. Yeah. So big weekend at Carver.
No, they go to Wisconsin.
Is it at Wisconsin?
Yeah.
I misread that.
Yeah.
Yep, at Madison. So a home on Friday, tomorrow night, and then away on Sunday, and then obviously the big one at Penn State coming up. So still working. Tom Brand's they're still working through some things. Obviously, you lost a lot off of last year's team. Marinelli being a huge one, but a lot of those guys that were super seniors have moved on. Good to see Spencer Lee coming back. I think he's starting to get into that groove after obviously huge surgeries and trying to get himself back into condition. I think he's starting to get there. So you have the Spencer Lee on the bottom. You have Cassiope having an outstanding season at the top. And, Real Woods, I think there are some weights. Kennedy, I think, is having a good season. Definitely some really strong performers at certain weights for Iowa, but still working through some things. Jacob Warner, obviously, veteran there, but still trying to work through some other weight classes and trying to shore things up there to compete with the best, because that's your Iowa. There is no, you're not wrestling for second place.
No, you're not. You're wrestling for first, and that's it. Period. You're Iowa, and it's a different mindset than even with with other sports that we spent an hour and 45 minutes talking about. That with Iowa wrestling, there's first place, and then there's everything else. But really to go to Spencer Lee, who in his own right is every bit the superstar that Caitlin Clark is, and I think if you're an Iowa sports fan, it's winding down, but man, you got to be tuned into this guy's career, because he is, on Monday night on the show that I'm with Scott Sable on Iowa Live, we had Mark Ironside, and he said that he's the best wrestler Iowa's ever had. Spencer Lee is, and he might be the best wrestler in NCAA history. And when you watch him compete, and that's just not like eyes up like this. I mean, Mark knows the sport. He's not going to try to BS anybody. And just now that he's getting some of his lateral movement back since his ACL surgeries, and you see, he almost gets stuck over at Purdue, and then he's down 8-1. Then he comes back and pins the guy. And against Northwestern, he's against number 3 guy in the country. No problem, sticks him. And the way he moves and the transition from attack to pinning combination is something I've never seen before, because he's so quick and strong and agile. There's just nothing like it. And I think he's really there. It's rare. And it's so rare that you just have to be in awe when you watch him. And, early in the year, he kind of struggled with his conditioning, but he hadn't wrestled in a year and a half, and I think it was the Iowa State match. He's up big, and then all of a sudden he's huffing and puffing by the end of the match. And it's like, okay, he's got a little bit of time, a little ways to go, but anybody that knows his work ethic, it's off the charts. So I think right now you're, the Nebraska duel is a big one. Penn State is huge, as we know, but I think this is a little bit of the disconnect in some ways. Maybe it's more the casual wrestling fan versus the real passionate one, that casual fans maybe look at duels a little bit bigger than the super passionate fans, because they look at the tournaments at the end of the year as paramount. So even if they lose at Penn State in a duel, I mean, they're not happy about it, but they're more about how did the guy wrestle, and and how does that help them for Big Tens, for NCAAs. And so I think that's really kind of where they're at right now.
Yeah, and I think I've noticed with Spencer as well, in terms of him getting getting his conditioning up to where he wants it to be. I just think there's some apprehension when you come back from major surgeries on your knees. We see it in other sports. You're a little bit reluctant to go full on your legs, and we see with ACL injuries with football and basketball, it takes a little bit of time, and I'm noticing that he seems a little bit more aggressive, and he's always aggressive, but just he seems more comfortable and not as apprehensive maybe as he was in that Iowa State meet. And watched him a little bit at the Soldier Salute. I went down there to shoot photos, and I could kind of see it building. I think by the end of the year, Scott, he's already a problem, but I think we're going to see some shit we ain't seen before by the end of the year.
Yeah. I mean, you look at his problems with his ACLs all these years, and this is the only sport you can do that in. It's not like you can play football with an ACL or basketball, but that prohibited, that limited him, and he was still able to be the most dominant wrestler in the sport and win national titles. Now that he has them repaired and they are healthy enough, and he's out there doing what he's doing, and the more confidence he has in his knees, He has supreme confidence in his abilities. You're right. I mean, by the time he hits nationals, he might be as dominant as any heavyweight is that wins by fall the whole time, except that never happens at 125. And and he's also had to try to figure out how to make weight and do it and stick with that weight, because that's very difficult for a player or a human to try to do, go through life that way. And so I think he's well on his way to being a 4-time national champion, a 3-time Hodge winner, and in a year and a half, having a gold medal at the Olympics. So I think he's the premier athlete in that sport, and we'll see it on full display over the next 2 months.
Tomorrow night, Friday night, January 20th, 8 p.m. at Carver Hawkeye Arena. That thing is sold out, but who knows? You may be able to get some tickets if you're roaming around there. And that one is on the Big Ten Network, as is Sunday's duel up in Madison against Wisconsin. So chance to get some wrestling in if you'd like. And then men's basketball is Saturday, 1 p.m. against Ohio State. And then, as Scott and I talked about, Monday night, the big one in Columbus, Iowa women at Ohio State. So some really important matches and games coming up for Iowa athletics. And as we spend a lot of time on this show, always football news to talk about. And we'll be back next week to do just that. Everybody have a great weekend. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you to all of our sponsors. And we will be back a week from today. We may have some special Hotspot podcasts too. We're trying to get some interviews lined up to give you guys a little bit more to listen to during the off season for football. Try to get some interviews set up there. So keep an eye out for that. We'll definitely publicize those when they come about, and we'll let you know. So thanks again, everybody, for listening. We'll talk to you next week on the Hotspot podcast. Say goodbye, Scott.
Goodbye, Scott.